Esther basically participates in creating the livelihood development projects, Self-Help Africa's livelihood development projects in Uganda. She's about developing and implementing capacity building plans for partner organizations to enable them to effectively manage their organizations and projects. A key thing about Esther's role is that she supports partner organizations develop appropriate poverty reduction and livelihood improvement initiatives within the project area. And look, what does that mean? That means Esther's job, well, we took on this role in Teso in Uganda. It was about putting more food on people's table, putting increased proteins and balance of proteins and carbohydrates on people's tables. That's what we do, and we work with small farmers to do that. And Esther, unusually in an area such as Uganda, a country such as Uganda, Esther's a woman in a leadership role, and she performs that role brilliantly, is accepted and respected by all the farming groups and all the communities that she works with. And I'm just really, really delighted that she's here and able to come here this morning and talk to us about how COVID-19 has impacted on the community there in Teso and what it's basically meant for families there. So Esther, over to you. You have the floor.
Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be part of this conference. Like Denia said, I work with smallholder farmers. I empower them to be self-sustaining, and we support them to engage in on-farm and off-farm activities, simply to improve their livelihoods and be more sustainable. So I'm going to talk about how COVID-19 affected the smallholder farmers that we work with. So basically, I'm localizing the effects of COVID-19 to the rural communities that we work for. So on 21st March 2020, Uganda confirmed the first case of COVID-19, and to date, the total number of confirmed cases is at 14,204, and with the 337 registered deaths. So like other countries, the government of Uganda put in place a lockdown that involved the closure of public places and the country's borders. The lockdown resulted in loss of livelihoods, leaving many families without financial means to purchase basic goods for their households. For some, movement of family members to rural or peri-urban communities from the city at the start of the lockdown increased pressure on household resources as opportunities for income generation were limited. The effects of loss of income were most marked among those who were most disadvantaged, including young women and men already out of school before the lockdown. And this demonstrated how the lockdown could amplify existing inequalities. As a country, Uganda anticipates a direct loss of $5 billion in the tourism sector during the next 5 years. A deterioration of fiscal deficit due to dampening of revenue collection and increased spending on needs for response and recovery efforts. A decline in remittances and deterioration of foreign direct investment following the impending global recession. The national poverty rates could rise between approximately 2 to 8% points. This could disproportionately impact on categories such as older persons, the women, households with a high ratio of persons with specific needs, in addition to those with the refugee or immigrant status, and marginalized groups within the rural communities where we work. The increase in unemployment could increase the poverty rate among wage earning households by 15.7%. The education sector was not spared either. Education is considered to be a powerful tool for growth throughout many sectors in Uganda. The country has labeled education as a key component for driving social growth, economic development, and transformation since becoming politically independent, as well as helping to achieve a more united nation and democratic reforms. In March 2020, schools were closed and partially opened in October 2020 for only candidate classes. This has, however, been opened to other classes on a phased manner. And with the children staying at home for about 1 year now, this dream is being threatened. The government, however, encouraged distance learning, but resource disparities between the rural and urban areas are intensified by the pandemic. The rural areas are less likely to have access to technology needed to successfully implement distance learning. These technologies include the radios, television, and internet. So you find that this has reinforced the already existing structural inequalities. The prolonged stay of children at home have affected the girl child more than the boys, with increased rate of teenage pregnancies being reported. In order to gain basic necessities like sanitary towels, girls have engaged in transactional sex with men who take advantage of their need for money. Much as boys are believed to face greater risks of physical abuse, girls are more susceptible to domestic violence and sexual exploitation. In addition to early marriage, many girls are also entering into workforce at a young age to help provide for their families. A survey conducted by Daily Monitor, a national newspaper in Uganda in June 2020, revealed that more than 2,372 teenage pregnancies had been registered during the lockdown as at June 2020. At least 128 schoolgirls had been married off and 110 girls had been defiled according to police records in the 6 districts visited. In Teso sub-region, where I stay, in one of the districts within our project areas, according to the district health department, the number of antenatal care visits for teenage girls between January to June 2020 was at 2,341. Adding to the burden, many girls are left without a partner and find themselves having to be breadwinners of their families. In Uganda, secondary, tertiary, and university education is quite expensive for average citizens. The young people who are enrolled in school feel the loss of education. For many, the costs associated with higher education are already hard to bear, and the school closure may lower their chances of completing their education. Closure of vocational training institutions dashed the hopes of some of the young people, and private school teachers were among the non-business people most economically affected, as most of them stayed without salary for 1 year. The rural communities who rely on government's free health care programs experienced a reduced access to primary care. As a result, there was an increase in the number of preventable deaths during childbirth and in other health emergencies, and an increased occurrence of death due to preventable diseases like malaria. Remember, there were travel restrictions, so people could not easily access the health facilities. So, and access to family planning and other health programs was also compromised. Domestic violence is a very disastrous habit in families. It became a very challenging turmoil during the COVID-19 lockdown period. The pandemic deepened gender inequalities because the burden of caring for children at home and sick or elderly family members falls disproportionately on women. The forced isolation of women in their homes created a dangerous situation and triggered domestic conflicts and episodes of abuse within the family. A survey conducted by Ejang in June 2020 indicates that Uganda had registered over 21,260 cases of child neglect, sexual and physical abuse. Due to the isolation regulations being enforced, women were forced to stay in homes with abusive partners and were at risk of being severely harmed or even murdered. Loss of women's employment opportunities affected income sources, resulting in aggravated gender-based violence because the men's self-esteem was affected as they could no longer provide for their families, and yet they are regarded as head of family. The other reason given was that women and men had not been staying at home for a long time together. So simple mistakes made them angry, leading to violence. And indeed, the Action Aid Shelter in Katakwi, one of the communities that we work in, registered an increase in people seeking services such as social support, mediations, and legal counseling. The Uganda Bureau of Statistics report indicated that 87% of households that had reported a reduction in income from at least one of their sources of livelihood since the COVID-19 lockdown began. Of these, 65% were those receiving wage employment income, and 60% were households involved in farming, like the smallholder farmers that we support. So when the lockdown was enforced, businesses collapsed because weekly markets were closed for 11 months. Small and medium businesses experienced the largest effects of risk associated with COVID-19 as compared to the large businesses. The increased price of food put pressure on household budgets. In the Uganda Bureau of Statistics report, it was found that 42% of the population experienced moderate or severe food insecurity during the COVID-19 lockdown period. And most of this population stayed in the rural areas. And this was worsened by the prolonged stay of children at home, who were putting a strain on household to not only keep up on increasing food prices, but to provide more meals than they usually do. In addition, agricultural enterprises were worst hit due to challenges of accessing inputs arising from transport restrictions and the ban on weekly markets, as well as due to the loss of demand and a shift from the consumption of fresh agricultural produce to dry rations. The burden of providing for the family was also left to the women, who were ever at home, as the men spent most of their time in the centers and returned home late with empty hands. But all was not lost. The positive side of COVID was that the study revealed that COVID had actually united some people within the area. The sense of togetherness that had emerged improved the relationships between some people. including the relations between husbands and their family members. It was even observed that people had become more responsible. Some were staying home and engaging in agriculture. There was also bonding between some parents and their children. Parents who were not used to staying with children for a longer time came to understand the characteristics of their children, and it seemed that the increase in domestic violence was due to failure to handle home responsibilities. So that is the effect of COVID lockdown within the community that we support. Thank you for listening to me.
Yes, and Esther, thank you so much for everything that you do there.